Well, in yesterday's lecture, we refer to this particular essay, Preface to the Lucky Charms. We are familiar with this particular essay now. We have understood that Apraben, a neoclassical playwright, novelist, and critic, has written this particular critical essay to defend her play, The Lucky Chance. So this is a preface. A preface means an introduction. In yesterday's lecture, before we understood about her observations regarding the critics' approach towards a play, because the play was a great success. And after she received a very good response from the audience, she also started receiving criticism. And we saw that she rejects, she disapproves all such kind of criticism or all the such kind of disapprovals by saying that this is out of jealousy. They do not have any other point to talk about. Out of jealousy, they are doing because they can't digest a success by a woman. And this criticism is only because she is a lady. When they came to know that the writer is a lady, her gender is the problem for these critics. That's what she thinks. That is her perception. Okay. And one more thing, she challenges actually them. She asks them if they can find or they could find anything objectionable, she will surrender to their criticism. Thirdly, she justifies her writing by giving references of certain owners of drama companies. So we saw that too in yesterday's lecture. Now, in this part of my lecture, I shall be talking about the points of criticism. Means, what are the points that the critics find objectionable in her play? So she says, I say, after all these supervisors, the ladies may be convinced they left nothing that could offend, and the main of their unjust reflections on so many judges of wit and decencies. So she refers to Dr. Davenant, then she refers to Sir Roger and Mr. Killigrew. In yesterday's lecture, we came to know something about these people. Charles Davenant was the owner and partner of King Charles, we can say. They ran a company, okay, United Company, which staged the plays in those days. Then she refers to Sir Roger, who was the licensor of published works of that period, and Charles Killigrew was the co-owner of the United Company. So she refers to these three people to defend her play. These people allowed to stage this play, The Lucky Chance, after reading only. They went through the play, they read the script, then only the permission was given, the license was given. Okay, but what she thinks that these men do not have any other point to criticize her, and their criticism is unjust. They are not able to digest her success. They do not have point to offend. So what they do now? The men of their unjust reflections on so many judges of wit and decencies. Okay? So they do not have any point. So they come up with unjust, improper, imbalanced observations, thoughts. Okay, then she says, see, okay, let me accept if they can answer my questions. When it happens that I challenge anyone to point me out the least expression of what somehow made the discourse. So she challenges these critics and asks them, actually, when she asks them to tell me the expressions in the play, the situations in the play which are objectionable, then they just crime is they tell. There is no logical or rational base for their criticism. Without any rationality, they blame. What they say? Now let's see the first objection that they have regarding the Lucky Charms. There is a character named Mr. Lay, and this Lay opens his nightgown when he comes into the bride chamber. So these are the things you must have seen in Hindi movies as well. Bed scenes are shown. So they have the objection with this particular character, Mr. Lay, opening the gown, okay, in the bride's chamber. So they find it objectionable. So who is Lay? Lay is not a character, he's an actor. Anthony Lay, the famous comic actor of that period. And the offending action is specified in the stage directions. The action, the character enters into the bride's room. Bride means you might be knowing, a newly married lady. Okay. And he opens the nightgown. That is the objection. And it was not acceptable in those days. Now, what is her answer to this particular objection, to this particular condemnation or accusation? If he means who? Mr. Lay, the actor, which is a jest of his own making. It is not I. I have not written it in my play. It is the actor who does it, and which I never saw. I hope he has his clothes on underneath. So this is something funny, What she says, okay, he opened, but he has clothes on his body, underneath clothes. Means you might be knowing now. And if so, where is the indecency? Okay, he opens his nightgown, that is okay. In those days, it was not so easy. These days, now you can see men without clothes, women without some clothes only, okay, scanty clothes. So that is very common these days. In those days, these were not so common things. Therefore, the critics had objection. Now, if today we talk about these things, we'll be considered, traditional, orthodox people. So what she says, I don't see any kind of indecency, any kind of ill-mannered or immoral behavior in it. He has his underneath clothes. And the man showed in his drawers and waistcoat and never, sorry. Yeah, and then she gives reference to the play by Nathaniel Lee and John Dryden, a common play, Oedipus. Oedipus was a play written by this Nathaniel Lee, a play of 1678 by Lee and Dryden, John Dryden, in Act 2, Scene 1. Oedipus, the titled character, enters sleepwalking in his shirt. Okay. So this is what she finds objectionable. In my play, Mr. Lay opens his nightgown, but in the play by Lee and Dryden, the title of the play is Oedipus. There is a scene wherein Oedipus sleepwalks in a shirt, the gown opened wide, and the man shown in his drawers and waistcoat, and never thought it an offense before. He does not have underneath clothes, only shirt is put on. And critics never objected this scene because that play is written by men. When a woman writes, or woman's, it is a play by women, then you have a problem. When men do it, there is no problem. Now this is the first objection. Now second objection, another cries. Now these are very important things that you need to understand. There can be a question of 5 marks on it. What are the objections of the critics regarding the lucky chance? The second objection, as mentioned by Aproben, why we know not what they mean when the man takes a woman off the stage and another is thereby cuckolded. So this is another criticism. Okay, means this is the off-stage scene, not on the stage. A man takes a woman off the stage, and another is thereby cuckolded. Another man, suppose during Restoration period, that was a kind of common scenario. They talked about the social problem wherein women had affairs with other men. So that was shown. A man takes a woman and another man whose wife is taken is cuckolded. You know, we might be knowing the meaning of cuckold. A cuckold is a person whose wife cheats on him. Means he has an affair with other person. Okay, so this is again a problem. Then what is her answer now? Is that any more than you see in the most celebrated of your plays? She says, doesn't it happen in your plays? It happens in your plays as well. So she names certain plays. City Politics, the Lady Mayoress, and the Old Lawyer's Wife. These are the plays that she mentions here. Okay, City Politics was by John Crowns. Okay, John Crowns' trial play performed in the session of 1682 to 83. The Lady Mayoress and the Old Lawyer's Wife are two characters who make their husbands cuckolds. These are two characters from the City Politics. Okay, City Politics is the play by Crown, and in this play, Lady Mayoress and the Old Lawyer's Wife have affairs with some other man who goes with a man she never saw before and comes out again the joyfulest woman alive for having made a husband a cuckold with such dexterity, and yet I see nothing unnatural or obscene. It is proper for the characters, and she does not find anything wrong in the presentation of such scenes on the stage or in the play are talking about, because that is proper for the characters. So in that lucky play of the London Cuckolds, not to recite particulars, okay, even in another play there are certain such scenes, London Cuckolds. She does not give the details, give the particulars. And in that good comedy, she is mentioning the names of certain plays of her period, which have all these things. And in that comedy, good comedy of Sir Courtly Nice, the tailor to the young lady, in the famed Sir Puffling, Dorimond, and Belinda, see the very words Means all these are the names. She's mentioning of the characters of the plays of a play. She's talking about this. So John Brown's comedy, the tailor of the young lady to the young lady uses double entrance in his talk. The young woman and her aunt in Acts 2, scene 2. So see, there is a reference to this. Then there is Ether's man. Ether is the author. Ether's Man of Mode, or Sir Poppling Flutter of 1676. The hero Dorimond sleeps with Belinda, and then describes the pleasure. Okay, so these are some of the plays you can see wherein you come across all such kind of scenes, but still critics do not have any problem because these are the plays written by men. Okay, she gives certain other examples. I'm not going in details. In Valentinian, wherein they see the scene between the court gods, then Valentine all loose and ruffled a moment after the rape, and all this you see without scandal and a thousand others. So these are the examples. All these have got all such kind of scandal, and you do not have any problem. There are rape scenes, there are these kind of cuckolding and all, but critics do not find any objection with those plays. Another example is the Moor of Venice. The Moor of Venice is a reference to Othello, Shakespeare's Othello. Okay, in many places, the Maid's Tragedy, the Moors of Venice is by Dryden, and it refers to Othello. The Maid's Tragedy, see the scene of undressing the bride, and between the king and Aminator, and after between the king and everything. All these I name as some of the best plays I know. So she's taking some of the best plays of their period, which have got all such kind of scenes which are objectionable in their view. She does not find any objection because she thinks that that is the need of the plot, the need of the characterization, etc. And even other critics do not find any problem with such kind of scenes. But when it comes to Opera Bain's play, The Lucky Chance, or other comedies, they have all objections. And she objects that very thing. Okay, if I should repeat the words expressed in these scenes I mentioned, I might justly be charged with coarse ill manners. Even if I mention those words from these plays, I will be criticized for being ill-mannered, having no modesty at all, being unmodest, okay, immodest we can say, and yet they so naturally fall into the places they are designed for, and so are proper for the business. So there is no objection, and even I do not have any objection because that is the need of the story. And that there is not the least fault to be found with them. Though I say those things in any of mine would damn the whole piece and alarm the town. Critics do not find anything wrong with these scenes, and they think that that is the need of the story. And if something of that kind appears in my plays, in my stories, then they have got all objections. So this is the problem with these critics. So there will be alarm across the town. Had I a day or two's time, as I have scarce so many hours to write this in, the play being all printed off and the press waiting, I would sum up all your beloved plays. So this is wonderfully well stated. Now what she says, had I got time, I would have summarized all such plays for your sake, for the critics. I would sum up all your beloved, the plays that you like, and all the things in them that are passed with such silence. So I will mention all the things, and these things are never objected. There is no criticism on it because written by men. That is the issue. So these are masculine strokes in me. such masculine strokes, such kind of things will not be allowed in my case. So I must conclude those women, she says, I must conclude those women, if there be any such, greater critics in the sort of conversation than myself, who find any of that sort of mind or anything that can justly be reproached. Okay, so nobody objects it, nobody has a problem with it. So she does not find any point of comparison actually, but it is in vain by dint of reason or comparison to convince the obstinate critic. The critics, according to her, are obstinate. Obstinate means who do not think of others, who are not ready to listen to others. So there is no point in convincing such people by giving comparisons, because their business is just to find fault. Okay, if not by loose and gross imagination to create them, they must either find a jest or make it. So they just seek an opportunity to condemn the writers like me, to criticize the writers like me. And they do not have any problem with the men writers. Further, she finally says in this part, I will venture to say, though against my nature, I venture means to dare. This is again not my nature. It is against my nature, because it has a vanity in it. That had the place I have writ come from further under any man's name and never known to have been mine, I appeal to all unbiased judges of sense if they had not said that person had made as many good comedies as any one man that has read in our age. So had it been a man, had I been a man, they wouldn't have any objection. Rather, they would have said that they are good comedies. And I would have been a great writer of the period. But the devil owned the woman damned the poet. So she thinks that she is blamed only because she is a woman. So this is how Apra Ben answers the criticism and just point out the criticism on her plates.